Canadian Whisky, a name synonymous with rye, prohibition, and fake caramel flavor. But what actually is Canadian Whisky, and how is it different from Scotch, bourbon, or even rye? Let's start at the beginning. Canadian whisky has a rich history dating back to the 18th century when European and American settlers brought their distilling knowledge to Canada. Grist mills would distill surplus grains to avoid spoilage, but this would be mostly wheat whiskey and it would have tasted rough. The first commercial-scale production of whiskey in Canada began in 1801 when John Molson purchased a copper pot still previously used to produce rum in Montreal. With his son Thomas Molson and eventually partner James Morton, the Molsons operated a distillery in Montreal and Kingston and were the first in Canada to export whiskey, benefiting from Napoleonic Wars' disruption in supplying French wine and brandies to England. In the 19th century, the whiskey industry flourished in Canada, with many distilleries springing up across the country. By the late 1800s, Canadian whisky had become popular not just domestically, but also internationally, especially in the United States. Prohibition in the US during the 1920s provided a significant boost to Canadian whisky, as it was legally produced and smuggled across the border to meet the high demand. The industry continued to evolve, and by the mid-20th century, Canadian whisky had cemented its place as a staple in North American liquor cabinets. Canadian whisky is made from a variety of grains, including corn, rye, barley, and wheat. The grains are mashed, fermented, and distilled to produce a high-proof spirit. The spirit is then aged in oak barrels for a minimum of 3 years, although many Canadian whiskeys are aged much longer to help develop their flavor. One key aspect of Canadian whiskey production is the use of blended whiskeys. Unlike some other whiskey-producing countries, Canadian distillers often create separate base whiskeys from different grains and then blend them together. This blending process allows for more creativity and variety in the final product. Canadian whiskey comes in several styles. Rye whiskey is perhaps the most famous style, known for its spicy, robust flavor profile. Even though the term rye is commonly used, Canadian law doesn't require a high rye content to use the name. Corn whiskey, often used as the base for blends, provides a smooth and slightly sweet character. Single malt and single grain whiskeys are also produced and sold as is. Blended whiskey is the most common style, where different grain whiskeys are blended to create a balanced and smooth spirit. The blending process is an art form in itself, allowing distillers to craft a consistent and complex product. So what do you do with all this? Well, some of the best well-known Canadian whiskey brands include Crown Royal, Canadian Club, and 40 Creek. However, there's also a number of newer brands that have gained popularity in recent years, such as Lot No. 40 and one of my personal favorites, Found North. Although it's an American company, they blend Canadian whiskey and it's worth every penny. The future of Canadian whiskey looks promising, with a resurgence in interest and innovation. Many craft distilleries are emerging, such as the Sons of Vancouver Distillery and Divine Distillery. I hope this has been a great introduction to Canadian whiskey. It's a style with a rich history and a lot of room for innovation.